Boom, we're recording. So, hello everyone. I'm here with my friend Lucas. Actually, no last names. Let's keep the privacy. Let's just say Lucas and give people your Twitter handle. What's your Twitter handle? Because it's not an actual name. It sounds like a molecule.
Yeah. It's actually a very important protein. It's P70S6K.
P70S6K.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the main nodes of the mTOR signaling pathway. And yeah, I like the name, so it was
Nice.
instead
Nice.
of
And it gives you it's a conversation starter.
I guess yeah.
So tell people what you do, because I have some vague idea, but I actually couldn't explain it properly.
Yeah, I mean, in simple, I'm a structural biologist, so I try to solve structure of different protein complexes or protein DNA complexes from the cell, ideally at an atomic level. So basically, I try to have the 3D information of proteins at the molecular level, so we can understand better how they work. So now I'm in a lab that I'm doing a postdoc, but I'm in a lab that works in the mTOR signaling pathway. We use yeast, a small organism. But I kind of ended up doing this by, I mean, it wasn't planned, you know, it's just serendipity that I ended up doing what I do.
Yeah. And you're doing this in Switzerland, right? Geneva.
Yeah. So I'm in Switzerland now. I did my PhD in Germany, also structural biology. There was in my PhD, I was more kind of hardcore structural biology, so I worked only on that. Now I'm doing some cell biology also. But yeah, I mean, actually, I studied nutrition when I was young, so my bachelor is in nutrition.
Okay, so that's where, is that where the interest rises from, or was it even before your bachelor's?
Well, it's a long story, but if I try to summarize, so when I was young, I didn't know what to do. I didn't like anything. So I started studying graphic design, like in university, like for doing like kind of illustrations or whatever, because I like tattoos and this kind of stuff. But then I realized I was very bad at drawing and arts and these kind of things. And at the same time, I kind of got involved in the gym and got interested in nutrition, and I switched to study nutrition. But then around almost finishing my career, I was completely, how would you say, like bored or fed up with what I was being taught. Because it's not like I'm a super intelligent guy, but it was just not very intellectually challenging. It was just like, memorizing things. But then I also had a very, very good teacher that gave two courses, like biochemistry and then molecular biology. And then thanks to that, I found the papers, like science, and I discovered that there is a whole world which relates to nutrition and metabolism to molecular biology, and I just found it extremely cool. So at that point, I was super interested. I started reading studies from my side, and at the same time, what I was being taught in my career wasn't really related to anything at all. It was just learn these guidelines. If you have this kind of patient, then you need this kind of diet, and that's it. There wasn't really a link between the two. And I guess that's how I decided to then focus on science. So I then moved to do a master in biochemistry and molecular biology. Ended up working on something completely unrelated to nutrition. It was more like gene transcription in a single molecule lab, so more biophysics. And then because, why not? I applied to a PhD in Germany, and then I became a
Yeah,
structural biologist. So it's
nice.
no.
Yeah. Are you here, Lucas? Yeah, I can hear you.
Froze. Yeah, yeah. But
Okay.
you
Yeah,
froze for a
I
second
was
before.
yeah, I turned my video off. Maybe it'll
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
transmit better. Yeah, it's interesting that you started out saying that you didn't know what you wanted to do, and you sort of ended up going into science, because I had basically the same sort of path where I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I just thought I'll go into business because I think that's where the money is, which was sort of very superficial, self-serving type of thinking when I was around 15, because I actually had to make my choices when I was 14, 15, because I
Okay.
graduated school, I was still 17. So I arrived in London at university. I couldn't even a bank account, couldn't even open one yet. And so I did this sort of like business management with a language course, and found it extremely boring,
Mhm.
despite having some excellent Italian teachers. I just found it extremely boring, and basically just started diving deep into Peter from Hyperlipid's blog, and just starting to read that, and figured out that I couldn't figure anything out. It was too dense, too complicated, and so I just started taking textbooks and reading studies, and basically giving myself my own education. And I thought, well, I'm spending so much time doing that, I might as well go and get a degree for it, and actually like to turn it into something. And yeah, then
Yeah,
it led me down that path. So it's funny how boredom and the need for an intellectual challenge can push you into some pretty let's say challenging spaces, I guess, when you get to them.
yeah. I think it's also. I mean, I found whenever I talk to our scientists, mostly you can group them in one kind of in a type like us. Like you just end up because of your own curiosity, and like it's just where you end up. And there is another completely opposite one, which there is a pretty defined moment in which they knew they wanted to be a scientist, and they just follow the path. But I don't know how actually why do you became interested in hyperlipid if you were um, mostly in
Yeah.
business?
Because actually the thing that sort of changed it for me, and it's very it's very very typical for, I guess, a low carber, was Gary Taubes's book, where I fell upon his book, and the first time I read it, I was like, I don't get it. I just put it down. I was like, whatever. And then a month or two later, for whatever reason, I picked it up again, and it's like being like sucked into a vortex. Then you're like, shit. You get sucked into it, you read it, you read it, you read it, and you're like, how can there be so much that I don't know that obviously I should know and everyone should know? And now I feel like I have to tell everyone about it and be annoying. And and so that's kind of how it started. And it just, and my nature, I guess, is very, I don't know, a lot of people describe me as like a bit of an airhead, like, oh, you forgot to do this and you're not paying attention. Yet I love getting into the details and actually counterfactuals and positing a hypothesis and disproving it. I love all that mechanics of science. So Peter's blog was excellent because, in a sense, it started at the most basic level, which is the complexes of the mitochondria. And it's such a, there is no, this is the basement. You can't really go any deeper than that, in a sense. And so it was very
Mhm.
tangible. And I think it sort of made it like a bit of a puzzle game. I was like, okay, there's something to figure out here. This is not just like very wishy-washy stuff. And I think it sort of set my expectations for how I would see the rest of science. Um, that's sort of, I guess, the like intellectual genesis for me in the space. And yeah, I don't quite know. I don't think a lot of people start out interested from Peter's work. It's usually something other that pushes them to study it deeply, because Taubes gave me the layman's interest, and then I guess I got the expert level interest reading Peter's stuff. Yeah, I think that's how it happened for me.
Yeah, I actually ended up. Um, I mean, it's funny because the first, I think I'm close to being pretty sure that the first paper I read in my life was one that I got as a homework for this course that I talked about. That was about calorie restriction and aging. So I'm talking about maybe like more than 10 years ago,
Yeah.
because at the time there was still a lot of science on that. And to me, it was just so, like I was blown away. But then upon reading more and researching more, I ended up like in the low carb ketogenic literature. And that was like kind of a second enlightenment for me because
Yeah.
it was, yeah, it was something so different. And actually I was going to be a professional in nutrition, right? The equivalent of an RD. And at the
Yeah.
time, I basically didn't hear anything about anything molecular or how it relates to what we're being told that you should eat, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I ended up in low carb or ketogenic by a completely different path. And then I discovered, like, like Tops and Peter and these kind of things.
Okay, interesting.
And I get the feeling that a lot of people who are more into, like, come from a biological background, like to study biology in undergraduate or biochemist, and they start to get interested in nutrition, they also end up somewhere around low carb or ketogenic stuff. Um, and I think there should be a reason for that, right?
Yeah.
I don't think, well, I think that one of the main reasons, and I also have found that talking about nutrition with people who come from a biology background is a lot easier than talking with someone who is the expert in nutrition, because they don't have any preconceived bias. They can
Right.
understand, like, you can talk about the pathways and stuff, and they know, because as a biologist you can switch from different topics because the system works very similar. The cells work in a very similar manner. Um, but so that's for example one thing that happened with my wife. When we met, I started showing showing her all the stuff, and she's also a biologist, and she was actually doing her research work testing different lipids on guinea pigs. And she was having a lot of trouble reconciling her results because the diet in which it had the most saturated fat actually was better than the other ones, which were rich on PUFAs, basically. One was rich in mostly omega-3, and the other one in, I think it was omega-6. I don't remember exactly the details. But at the time where we met during our masters, she was like kind of having trouble explaining why she was finding that. And then I remember, because at the time, when you discover, I think in a sense it's very similar to the vegan enlightenment, like you see these people who follow a vegan diet that suddenly discover a lot of new stuff, and then they're just blown away, and then just keep reading and telling everyone about, like, you become like kind of like a proselytist for a particular diet.
Yeah, you just evangelize.
Exactly. So at the time I was like getting really into a more low carb keto diet, and I remember I got this I don't know how it's pronounced, but this Ranskov book. That I think the title was something like "Fat and Cholesterol is Good for You," and I gave her the book, and then she was like, "Oh, now everything makes sense. Why I'm seeing what I see," and like she didn't have any trouble at all saying, but this is like this is not what you hear like from the official recommendations, because she could understand somehow like the very basics. It wasn't challenging any ideas. It was just showing up maybe this is not right, and if you understand why, it's a lot easier for you to like at least be aware of different viewpoints on a topic.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, that some degree of ignorance or absence of preconceived notion is advantageous by contrast, really, by contrast with the unfounded certainty that this is why I always have this like silly little saying that experts are a social construct, but expertise is very real. Um, it's um, it's just a different way of understanding it, I think.
Yeah, and I can imagine because I mean, I wouldn't say I was an expert or I'm an expert in everything, but basically my whole formation in mobile and biochemistry was I learned by myself. I just read papers,
Right.
read books, and so I didn't need like kind of an official like formation, to get at the same level of some other people who
Mm-hmm.
were also at the same level at the time. So I know that you can become more, you can develop your
Yeah.
expertise without having the expert umbrella.
Oh, it's for sure. And you know what? Like in when I was doing my master's in molecular biology, I was doing it. It was a distance learning part-time course. So I would go there a few weeks a year, a few weeks in the year to do some lab stuff, and the rest of the time was like a totally online course, basically. And so when I went there, I learned to run a PCR, very basic RT-PCR, qPCR. But in the last few months, because of this whole PCR thing, PCR gate, PCR scandal, I've been learning way, way, way more about it. Like there's just the amount that I can learn by following people like Kevin McKernan, by reading some of their reviews. They really go into the details of how they parameterize the machine, the different techniques like subgenomic DNA used to be able to distinguish live from real. It's been really, really educational. And my master's just didn't give me that. And it's not because the teacher was bad. It's not made to teach you, really. It's just made to certify that you did something. That's really all it's there to do. And I think if people could appreciate that, they would put much less trust in experts and would put much more trust in someone who is demonstrating expertise, like constructing an argument, giving you a prediction so that they can be wrong in the future. And there's some very, very simple things that I think as a scientific literacy project, it would be so crucial to start to get people to pay attention to. It's hard to get that through to people, that distinction.
Yeah, I think now, I mean, also, I mean, back then, it was a completely different time, right? Now you have so many voices speaking at the same time, and I can understand why it's difficult to kind of filter out who knows what he's talking about and who doesn't.
Right.
So I think it's a tricky thing. I mean, you and me probably we can discern a little bit better some arguments, but if you're just curious, I think there is a lot of also mixed up things. So I have seen some examples actually. Actually, I was reading these last days.
Mm-hmm.
Because you talk about PCRs, and yeah, I kind of like I agree with a lot of the criticisms about the PCRs, but
Mm-hmm.
for many people who are like many, it's like the post I just made a couple of I think yesterday. So you have the clear criticism of PCR, like as how it's being used to determine who is positive or effective or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
then this is just part of a lot of different things, with many of the proponents have. So they are also usually like anti-lockdowns, also anti this particular vaccine. So it forms part of a worldview kind of like. So
Yeah.
and that also doesn't help because, for example, if I say, yeah, I, I'm not saying that I'm like that, but if I say that I'm against this mass PCR testing, people will immediately assume that I also share all these other things that the most vocal proponents of the anti-PCR, if you say, share.
Right. Yeah.
So that makes it a lot more difficult to, like yeah, like to really pay attention to criticisms that are valid versus the rest of the things that might be a little bit more shaky. Or the most common thing that I think you also posted is that many people are not able to discern particular ideas. So if someone who is like popularly denoted like a quack say something
Mhm.
correct, it cannot be correct because he's a quack,
Right, right.
so if he says it, then it means it's definitely wrong. And I think, yeah, that also fucks up things in a way
Yeah.
that yeah, as a non-expert, if you're just navigating all the info, then it can be very, very hard to discern.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example of what I meant by this difficulty of sort of coming down clearly on certain claims, because you're going to be grouped with, I don't know, some extreme anti-vaxxer or something. So the other day I was on Twitter, and then I come across this tweet where this person is like, see, masks don't work, they're useless, they nebulize everything, they make everything worse. Now it triggered my bias, right? I was like, oh, more evidence for that, right? I go look it up, look at the study, jump to the results and methods, and I look at the graph, and it's basically showing that out of the 10 masks that they tested, there was just a bandana that was worsening the transmission of the virus. And for all the other masks, for a given particle size, so it could be different maybe for other particle size, but for the given one they were measuring, most of them basically sort of linearly stopped the small particle droplet transmission. And I was like, I still don't believe masks are particularly useful public health intervention, but that study is not showing what you show. It seems that masks, if they don't work, it's not because they reduce small droplets, because they don't reduce small droplets. Actually, they can reduce it, and they seem to. But the problem is there's maybe other reasons and other routes of infection to explain why people still get infected with masks. And it's like, if you're going to criticize something, you really don't need to invent incorrect reasons, right? You can actually think and understand that maybe people are carrying the virus with them already. They just haven't developed symptoms yet. So the mask it can't do anything about that, or for any host of other reasons. And I think it's a good exercise to be on the lookout for those sort of things, because they're the easiest ones to fall to, like when they trigger your bias.
Yeah, exactly. That's a big thing. I think one of the biggest things one can do is to be aware of the bias that one has. So I'm aware that, like, if you put most of the things I think of, like in terms of nutrition or even like in COVID, you would say I'm more of a contrarian side, and I know that
Right.
my bias is towards like not believing like everything,
Yeah.
right? But I'm aware of that. So and the problem is that social media, like being Facebook or Twitter, kind of is just an echo chamber. So it amplifies all your bias because it creates engagement. So you will only see the things that agree with your viewpoint, and that will make you even more biased
Of course.
towards your particular position. And so I think it's hard, but but if you realize that you have to apply the same level of criticism and skepticism to everything, especially with the things that agree with your ideas, then you will be able to form like a more solid and scientific viewpoint. And it's also, this is not only from like anti-mask, anti-lockdown, whatever. It also happens, and I think that's one of the main things that I've seen many people argue, is that you see it from the mainstream. It's like so, it's just like an echo chamber that they just repeat, and like to pat themselves on the back, and
Yeah.
something that might challenge one part of that view, then it's completely wrong. So there's no room for them being wrong, you know. Um,
Yeah, it's
and
the certainty. It's the certainty and the
yeah.
moralizing. And I think with less of those two, we could make much more progress. But Um, I actually I don't know why I'm thinking of this right now, but I saw your tweet the other day talking about the keto crowd and the low carb crowd, and that it's being mixed in with a lot of snake salesman
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
So I was hoping you could say more about that because I'm curious about like what triggered it and if you can develop that thought because it's when Stephen Guyenet responds, I have to pay attention.
Yeah. Um, so I mean, it's something that it's not new. So I got the feeling like a long time ago. Actually, I remember now. Would probably maybe around 3 4 years ago, I said the same thing to my wife in one trip back, about fasting. Because I see so
Mhm.
many claims about the magical benefits of fasting and how it will, like if you fast for 18 hours a day, then you will regenerate your immune cells,
Yeah.
and and those are the voices that get amplified and the message that
Mhm.
gets thrown out. So at some point, um, most people equate fasting with these claims. Like if, for example, I'm a proponent that fasting is beneficial, then I
Mhm.
also think that if you fast for 18 days, you will regenerate your immune cells, and then it will make you invincible against cancer or
Mhm.
something like that. Like by extension.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and I see the same in the keto. Like because ketogenic dieting and fasting are kind of under the similar umbrella,
Mm.
and because of I think the way in which social media works, the louder voices are the ones who are heard more. So I
Yeah.
see, like, like it can go even to the magazines, like in they cover like lose 20 pounds in 5 days with the keto diet,
Right.
to like really ludicrous claims that if you eat a keto diet you will not get cancer, and like it's a cure for all. um,
Mhm.
so I find it really really sad, because I think there is a lot of merits of if you just like put your blindfolds on from whatever guru
Yeah.
says and just look at the data, like the hard
Mhm.
science and on ketogenic dieting and fasting. There is a lot of potential merits. The thing is that we cannot say
Right.
that for sure that that will happen, or that we just can assume or think that there should be a kind of a benefit for these interventions in particular processes or
Mhm.
circumstances. um, but then already people are coming from the side in which, because they have heard so many of these people saying like, yeah, you can eat like, I don't know, 10,000 calories of fat and you will not get fat, or like
Right.
these really extreme
Yeah. Yeah.
views. Then whenever you say something that about keto or fasting or whatever,
Mhm.
then immediately they put the bias, sorry, the quack detector on, if you will.
Yeah.
No, then so it's like what we're talking about, like grouping things in kind of a word. It's not a
Mm.
specific um, kind of idea. It forms part of many ideas that come together, and
Yeah.
I
They all
think
get attached to the each other.
yeah, exactly. So and yeah, I think it's very. I think it doesn't make any, like, it doesn't help at all that you have this kind of voices, like, because um I'm mostly referring to kind of like unsubstantiated, I think it's called,
Right.
claims.
Yeah.
So because they promise, like everything, like the immune regeneration. I've seen it in an ad for a fasting app, I think. um
Of course.
Then you see the clock timing,
Yeah.
and then as you approach 16 hours, you're burning fat, and then if you approach 18, now you're regenerating your
Yeah.
immune system. And it's like, I mean, it's just bullshit, like we don't know.
Yeah.
You cannot know, and probably I think you will need a lot more than 18 hours to really trigger any of these changes.
All
um,
right.
so I think it's just this, in the end it forms part of this very cultish, closed, uh, kind of arguments that some people make and adopt, and not being able to critically also apply the same level of
Yeah.
skepticism to their own claims. And and whatever people say that for most common people problems, which is probably losing some weight, the keto diet works. So if you put in most cases, if you put someone to eat just fat and protein, they will lose some weight. So then this fact can be taken by some people like that want to sell things or they want to promise like magic things, and sell it as something magical that is not really is. Something like, to me, like very strong support, but it's nothing is magical, like
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
So in the end, if you
For
want
sure.
people to be more to accept more this kind of extreme meat diet, which is the opposite of what you always heard that you should eat, then you should project some also level of scientific like support, like how to say, to
Yeah.
be
Some sort of
responsible of what they were
evidence.
saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
But
it's yeah.
the problem is that you're engaging in asymmetric warfare because the world, science is being used by non-science people and non-science purposes, and the arms race is about the hype, and doing what you suggest is handicapping yourself in terms of the public voice. And there's like a tension there I don't really see how to differently incentivize things except telling people, careful, it's dangerous for you. But that's hard to make them believe it, right? That would be maybe the way to equalize the thing. But there's a particular, because you're talking about hype and bullshit, and there's one that's really annoying to me, and it's the epigenetics one. It pisses me off. This term pisses me off because like epigenetics is fucking awesome. It's incredible. It's as close to magic as you're gonna get in terms of like biological systems. Maybe quantum biology is the only more magical thing than it, but it gets so misused. And I'm no subject matter expert, but I love the subject and I read quite a bit about it. And I read the founder's work, which is Mark Patashny, and I read his basic, papers, and the one where he clarifies the misconceptions about epigenetics. And he essentially says you need three things for epigenetics. You need memory, specificity, and autosufficience to maintain, to say that it's an epigenetic phenomenon and it's going on for multiple generations. Because he says essentially most people are actually just talking about gene regulatory processes and histones, and that's pretty much what they're talking about, and it's great, it's fantastic, but they keep harping on this like epigenetics in the environment and your grandmother influenced you, and I think it's like it got mixed in with like a natural fallacy in a really weird way, like this really technical aspect got mixed in with like archaic wisdom that's transmitted and stuff, and it's one that I can't get anyone prominent in the community to understand. I totally failed to explain it to them. I must have talked about it so many times. So you probably know more about all this than I do, given your structural and molecular work.
Yeah, not so much. I mean, to be honest, I know like the very basics of epigenetics and sufficiently to understand, but I'm no expert at all. Like genetic stuff is just something that I'm more like a biochemist. Kind of, I integrate more info on a pathway level, but scientifically, I'm more like into the really zoomed in mechanistic way in which proteins work.
Right.
So I think actually, I mean, because similar to you for epigenetics, I also had some, I think it's called pet peeve with several terms that, like they come in waves. So a couple of years ago, it was the microbiome, like everything is the microbiome cures everything, everything is related to microbiome. Now I think it's time restricted feeding. It's the new kind of microbiome. So, like we go by waves of interesting findings that then like lead to nowhere, kind of.
Right.
So I think epigenetics is just a part of that, and it's also kind of like it sounds very, like cool. It's not like if you just say genetics, yeah, I mean, everyone has heard of genes and, you have the gene for whatever. But epigenetics, like, and the fact that you can actually influence gene expression by changing the environment. I think for most people who haven't had this background, then there's something like, what? Like, I only tell
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you have the gene or not. So I think it gets mixed up with that. And I think it's part of every like really cool scientific discovery. Um, so yeah, just as the microbiome now with circadian rhythms, like it's just one
But
more
I'm
term
talking
that.
about the misunderstanding in the mainstream of that scientific field.
Oh,
Because when I read
yeah,
papers about it, it's like, guys, like you're just exchanging methylation for epigenetics. That's literally what they're doing. I'm like, but I don't get it. I like this is like it's actually a big deal in a paper because it's really different to say something is transgenerational and it has these properties that maintain it versus something that's gene regulated. It actually matters. It's not like for the average guy on the street, they're just talking about environmental interactions. So okay, it doesn't
yeah,
actually matter. But in papers, I'm like, wow, like this is such a blind spot. And yeah, I'm kind of surprised by it. I don't see that in every field.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not very familiar with the epigenetic field, to be honest. But I noticed over the years that usually you can kind of find these things when you are mostly dealing with bioinformatics papers, because most of the bioinformaticians, I think, come from an informatics background, so they're very good at analyzing
Right.
data and finding things. But then when you want to put it into context, it's like when you do a study to identify, I don't know, like particular genes. You identify a gene and then you try to see what is the function of this gene and how we can kind of relate it to the disease that we're looking at. I think maybe it comes from this background difference.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, could
yeah,
be.
it's like, I don't know if you remember a paper that came out. Honestly, I don't remember. Last year and this year have been mixed
Mm-hmm.
up but it
Right.
was definitely either last year or this year about. Yeah, I think it was kind of correlation between different macronutrients and like disease or body composition. But I think it was found that protein intake kind of correlated with weight gain or something like that.
Mm.
So then they, like they speculate why if you eat more protein, you will get fat. And if you look at the authors, the main authors were like kind of economists. So they
Mm.
they came from like, something completely unrelated. So you
Yeah.
might be able
Yeah.
to methodologically find things, but then to explain it, to put it into context is a completely different thing,
Right.
especially putting it
Right.
into context.
Yeah, that's exactly what the discussion I had yesterday with my dad. I was trying to explain because I just got tested for COVID. So he was asking me, can you explain what the results mean? Because you had 3 tests. So what does that mean? And I was like, basically there's not like the tests themselves, the technology of the test, they're fucking amazing. Like they're incredible. But the tests themselves and all that's where things get messed up. And I was like, okay, the serology is telling me about an exposure and how I responded, right? And then I'm explaining that the antigen is more about the presence of the virus over a certain time. Then the PCR is blah blah blah, and I'm going through that with him, and it's actually I'm like, damn, that's actually really complicated to explain. Like my dad's a
yeah,
smart guy, and it's complicated to explain. Yeah, so I tested positive at the PCR. I tested positive for the antigen test, and I positive, and they just gave me a total serology antibody test, not IgG IgM distinction, and I was negative for that. And I'm pretty proud of myself because I predicted all 3. I said PCR for sure I'm positive, antigen most likely because I had very very mild symptoms, and it was 4 days, 5 days. And the serology, I was like, it's the least likely. I'm young, I'm pretty healthy. I probably have mucosal IgA giving me a help or cell mediated immunity or whatever. And yeah, so I ended up getting a 3 out of 3 and two positive results on the 3. So yeah, I deserve a medal.
But you're fine. You didn't have any big issue, no?
No, yesterday I went for a trail run / walk. So I was like running, walking around the hills where I'm at. It's pretty steep pre-alpine territory. That's around 650 meter in altitude. So I just went for a run under the light rain, and no, it was fine actually. It was a lot of fun. I felt good. The only symptoms I got started out Monday morning. So today we're Sunday, so nearly a week now, 6 days. Basically some very light scratchy throat. Like you don't even know if it's something. You just like you just go like that a few times, and then towards the end of the day, I was like, my mood and my energy is low, and I'm not hungry, and I didn't eat, and that's it really. I had like because I have asthma as a kid. I don't have it now. I had it as a kid, and so anytime if I get something, I always feel it in my lungs basically. And I'm surprised that with the COVID, it's much less of a respiratory issue than I experienced with past influenzas or something. I was expecting it to be the major symptom in my case, and it wasn't. So that's interesting. And strangely, I only lost my sense of smell yesterday. So after 5 days, not since the first day.
Yeah, no, it's I think it's also tricky because now we're kind of like entering the winter, and I mean, I think the most prudent thing if you don't want to like be contagious is just like stay at home if you're sick. But knowing
exactly
the symptoms are so unspecific, unless you kind of like lose your smell and this kind of stuff, it's like, how do you know? It's very hard. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I saw my parents. So I flew in on Sunday. I saw my parents like early Monday morning. So I didn't even have time to say that I'm not feeling well. Like, you don't even think about it. And it's towards the end of the day. I was like, maybe I'm coming down with something. So I isolated for the rest of the week. And after 6 days, I came up to see my family because I was already feeling better since 2 days. And they basically say a week, so 6 to 7 days. It's a probability curve. So I think my parents got it, by the way, but they seem to be doing okay as well, either from me or for someone else. I don't know. Yeah, but they're older though.
Yeah. No, I think. I think at some point we all will get it. Either we have it, or we will get it. I think if there is something that actually we can be sure, well, I think it's very, very likely is that at this point we cannot contain it anymore. Like the window for containing it was long gone at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention, but my girlfriend had it maybe 2 months ago now, and I stayed, of course, with her in the apartment for a whole week, and I didn't get it. So you can't control this. Like this idea that that it's like a tangible thing. Actually, it's really like the wind, and you can use common sense and stuff, but you can't control it, right? You have to live with it, really.
Yeah.
It makes for messed up risk perception.
Yeah. It's now we're kind of like, at least we have been semi-closed for almost 2 months now, and they have extended 1 more month now, because like the French part of Switzerland was really hardly hit. So, and the German part was not so much. So, like only us were kind of restricted.
Nice.
It's shitty. But I hope that at some point they, not only here, but like most of the places where I've seen that, they realize that they cannot keep doing this yo-yoing thing, like cases spike, okay, let's close. And then reopen and then close again. I mean, you cannot live like that.
Yeah.
So at some point you have to like have a better plan. But it is how it is.
That's
I
true.
really, I mean, honestly, I'm mostly pissed about the whole situation, not for me, but
Mm,
for people who are really, really, I can imagine how people are completely losing their businesses, their jobs, and like even, I mean, I live with my wife. I'm pretty comfortable. I have things to do,
mhm.
but still, like having to be in the flat most of the time, it really affects you emotionally and mentally. So I can imagine if you're alone. Here, for example, there's a lot of people from all over the world that live alone in small places.
Mm.
I mean, we've been locked, relatively locked for 5 months in total, this year. So it's hard, huh?
Yeah,
And
it's
I get
crazy.
pissed. I mean,
Yeah,
in
like
France, it's
you,
worse.
it's right. France, it's even worse, and even worse is the UK, which now went into tier 4. They invented a new level of stringency again, and
Yeah, yeah,
it's like I tell people, that more than 400,000 kids, maybe a million kids, are not going to get vaccinated for tuberculosis this year. Like, and no one knows. No one knows. No one. It's not in a risk analysis
yeah,
or a cost analysis. It's on no one's mind. It's like, stop killing grandma.
yeah, exactly.
And like, my God, like, we have vaccines that work, and the people who are tend to be most pro-vaccine, whatever the fuck is happening, shoot it up my ass. I don't care. They don't give a shit that the vaccine programs aren't being effective anymore in the poor parts of the world.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's sad or
I
funny
think
or both or.
there's a fine line, to be honest, because I have to try to take things in a funny way, because otherwise
Right.
I will just be
Yeah.
like live a very unhappy life. Um,
Right.
I think I read something some months ago about what you mentioned, how the maybe risk perception is like very skewed, like in
Mm.
Europe and the US, and it's kind of countries that never have so that never dealt with infectious diseases on such a massive scale compared to other
Mm.
parts of the world. Like, for example, I'm from Peru, so there we live with you can imagine a lot of different infectious diseases, and it's
Yeah.
already part of our lives. Like tuberculosis, yeah, it's prevalent there. You know that in winter,
Hmm.
if you go to closed spaces, then you might catch tuberculosis. I mean, even if they do, because they test by antigens in the skin. Um, Probably, I think I'm positive. Like, we all have been exposed at some point, and yeah, you might develop severe
Yeah.
disease, but maybe not. Like, we live among all these risks for all our
Yeah.
lives, but in many parts of the, like, kind of the first world, you just have like these transient respiratory viruses, or like tick diseases or these kind of things. So whenever there is something more that appears to be more severe, then everything like gets crazy. Like, it's the worst.
Yeah.
um, I mean, it's just, I think it was an article trying to explain why of this panic induced response. I mean, I think there are reasons to be concerned, but like the level of panic and apocalyptic things that we have seen all these years many times are not very well substantiated, right? Um, and yeah, it was maybe because of this can explain
Hmm.
the response in different parts of the world.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I didn't think of that. It's true. It's not every part of the world has it as close in their, like, short-term memory in their RAM, uh, up there. And it's weird because a lot of people will argue, oh, if it happened to your family member, you would change what you say. Well, the husband of my cousin, he died a few weeks ago. He was a
So
60-something-year-old man. Yeah, thanks. He's a 60-something-year-old man. I barely knew him, to be honest, but he had cardiac issues. He had cardiovascular disease, serious stuff, and he died from COVID. And it's sad. It's really sad, but it's no one's fault. And it's not my cousin's fault. It's not other people's fault, and it's not yours or mine or anything. And this has always happened. This has always happened. There's no getting around
uh,
it. But I would be so ashamed of myself if I wasn't able to step back and think, okay, despite this tragedy, what's the right thing to do? You still have to ask yourself that question, even when tragedy hits you, close or something. And I just think people, even before something bad happens to them, they're so unable to see past their own immediacy that yeah, fear takes over.
Yeah, I think immediate emotions are very hard to overcome, like in general, particularly because also kind of, if you see from different countries, the messaging is that you are responsible if someone dies if you don't follow the rules. So it's putting the blame on the individual.
It's
So
crazy
then, of
public
course,
health policy.
yeah.
I can't believe
Uh,
that's a real endorsed message. It's insane.
Yeah, I've seen rationalization by marketing experts that but
Yeah.
yeah. So
It
then
doesn't pass the sniff test for me.
no, I agree.
Mm.
And then you have so I can imagine people. I mean, you've probably seen also some people like in the street with like the masks and the goggles and the shield and then the whole like you're going
Yes.
to Chernobyl or whatever. It's like I can imagine people are terrified. They just don't want to go out or don't want to touch something, and like it's a very tricky situation in general. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't have the right answers of how to do it or whatever. I can
Me
agree or
neither.
disagree, but I also understand it's not a simple um, thing to do, especially if you're in charge of a country. Because
Mm-hmm.
then politics and public perception and all these kind of things get mixed up in the.
Yeah.
I mean, and probably the people who take the decisions are not scientists, so they just
For
hear
sure
the
not.
opinion from a group of scientists. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a messed up thing. Hopefully, it gets better this year. Well, next year.
Yeah. I hope it will. I think that's enough. I think it's enough. We can move on to something else. But yeah, I just hope that we can learn at least something from it. I'm not sure we'll learn a lot, but I certainly learned a lot about pandemic management, and I'm sure there are other people as well. So hopefully,
Yeah,
I think the hardest lesson might be to learn that there is not much you can do, and that's very it's the worst thing politically, because the thing you want to do politically is to show you've done something. It doesn't matter what the fuck
yeah.
you do, just show you've done something. And so if you're like, well, there's no point, that's unacceptable. That's no.
Yeah, exactly. You're not fit for being. Yeah. That's why in the end, I kind of I try to understand where people come from. Like there is a reason why
Yeah.
people say things and behave that way. So instead of focusing
Mm-hmm.
on what they are saying, I try to understand why probably they are saying what they are saying. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I can imagine being put in the shoes of like the guy who has to take a decision. Not easy.
For sure. For sure. Okay, so Lucas, in the last 5 minutes, let me ask you how your diet is at the moment. What does it
So
look like?
nothing very fancy. I'm just eating very, very low carbs. Um, I'm trying to lose some weight that I gained over the last 2 years. Well, I was purposely gaining weight, but at some
Mm-hmm.
point it just got too much. So yeah, I'm just eating 1 meal per day. I don't count like what I'm eating honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But my carbs probably come from some nuts and like dark chocolate, like 90%. So like
Mm-hmm.
I eat around 20 grams, but the rest is either meat, eggs, bacon,
Mm-hmm.
cheese, like
Yeah.
and everything revolves around that. And
Gotcha.
yeah, I've lost kind of almost 10 kilos from 6 8
Oh,
weeks.
nice.
Yeah,
Oh, six,
I
7 weeks. It's not bad.
more or less. Yeah, I think it would be
Yeah.
at the most 8 weeks. Um,
Okay.
for me, for example,
Nice.
because now the gyms are closed,
Right.
um, so to me, going to the gym made me hungry. So it was very
Yeah.
difficult to control
Yeah.
what I eat after training. Like if you train very hard and you're starving
Absolutely.
afterwards. So if I'm just sitting here working, it's much easier to just control and like like control my hunger, let's say.
Yeah.
Actually trying
That's so,
to
it's so
yeah,
counterintuitive, but I love the first time I learned about that was from Taubes, who said go for a walk, to stimulate your hunger. And I was
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
damn, like that's funny.
Yeah, no, it's true. Because I guess most people eat by boredom, like
Mm,
especially if you're not used to eating like very low carbs and fasting, then you have this desire for eating that actually is not necessarily hunger. It's just you feel that you need to eat, and if you combine it
right.
with stress and you combine it with like I don't know what to do, so maybe I just
Yeah.
satisfy myself eating this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I'm actually trying to eat a little bit more fat and less protein now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, but like I don't like using so much added fats. I prefer to
Mm-hmm.
eat foods that are rich in fat that normally come
Yeah.
also with protein. So I
And
would say
taste-wise, it's
I eat.
better.
Yeah, exactly. I don't like drinking all of this kind of
Mm,
stuff. I use a couple of some lard, for example, to cook meat and
yeah.
these kind of things. Um, but otherwise, yeah, I would say it's very, very, with the except of
Mm-hmm.
coffee, the chocolate, and the nuts, is animal foods. I haven't been
Yeah.
eating any vegetables regularly, maybe some
Mm-hmm.
tomatoes or onions, but just to give some flavor if I fancy it. But
Yeah.
otherwise, I
Gotcha.
found
That's
it
interesting.
kind of reverting back to what I ate some years ago.
Mm. So you know what how I've been eating these past maybe month or two? 'Cause it reminded me of a conversation we had about like the best ways to gain weight, how important are carbs to that. So what I
Yeah.
was doing, because I have ulcerative colitis, I don't do well with fibrous stuff, but I actually
Mhm.
do pretty okay with carbs generally, if I don't have like a shit ton. So I basically had honey, dairy plus the meat, and honey and dairy and cream and all of that. It's great to gain some weight, and the difference, like I can see it in how I just make retain water, and that difference it gives you, it changes like one size of my genes basically. They just fill them up. It's incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
It's So yeah, I was thinking about that, and I think, like you say, the gym makes you hungry, so you eat more, of course, and you need the gym for the stimulus anyways. And then on top of that, if I use something like honey and dairy together, wow, I think that's really it just helps me eat more. So I don't
Yeah,
know how
yeah,
much of
yeah.
that is then all the anabolism that you mentioned, but it certainly helps me eat more.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's but I mean, theoretically, it might do something. I'm not
Mm,
convinced that it does a big effect, but I think indirectly it helps because it
yeah.
helps you eating more and might give you better strength, more
Mm,
strength in the gym. So indirectly it helps. Um, but yeah, I mean, these things are just, like we probably will
mm,
never know. No one will do a study of
yeah.
sufficient time, testing the sufficient
Right.
variables to know exactly. Um,
Yeah, true.
so,
I think carbs are more likely to work as an ergogenic aid more than anything.
yeah, 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 yeah.
That's really my guess, because the sweetness placebo trials, even though they don't always reproduce, I think there's something to that. That's my guess.
Yeah, yeah, I think it makes sense. Yeah, I think it just,
Mm,
if you eat carbs and how much carbs do you eat, I think it should be tailored what you want. So
right. Yeah,
it's just
definitely.
individual. And if you want to eat carbs, you can eat carbs. I mean, I don't have any problems eating
Yeah, exactly.
carbs. Um,
Yeah. But tell me, let me ask you the last question about
yeah, sure.
the protein leverage hypothesis. Um, because you know a lot about
Yeah.
protein biology. So what do you think of that?
I'm not extremely convinced that it's something too relevant in the levels that most people consume, because there is this
Mm,
idea that the general population eat too little protein.
mm-hmm,
I'm not convinced that that's really true, and I think this whole leverage pathways might kick in when you're really verging on the deficiency level of protein, like very low amounts. So, and at least acutely, you can say that if you eat a protein-rich diet, you might be satiated, but that's not. To me, it doesn't mean that this hypothesis is true. It's completely unrelated to me. I found it that for me, at least in terms of hunger, it doesn't make any difference. But I also don't eat low protein, so normally my diet ends up being high protein by definition. But I think it's not something very relevant in humans at the levels that people usually eat.
Yeah, I
Not very
wanted
convincing.
to debate Ted Naiman about it. We were going to do it. Dr. Tro had set it up, and then I think Corona hit at some point, and it got lost.
Yeah.
But it's I think it's an interesting topic. It's not a bad hypothesis, actually. I appreciate it. It's a good one to have. You know, it sort of makes sense that it would come up, but I pretty much agree with you. I think it's not really that relevant beyond a certain point, and even then, we really haven't explored other reasons to explain it, like other properties from high quality protein foods. I think there are a lot of other stuff in there that could explain why we see, you know, benefits in appetite regulation or something. There are other ways that we can explain it. So I'm not so sure about it either. But yeah, generally, I mean, I think, you know, I always actually recommend first, if people are having trouble losing weight, to increase the protein. But I don't at all make it like a recommend, like a you have to go that direction. I also say, if you've tried it higher protein, you know, try higher fat now. See how that helps your appetite or something. So for me, it's like it's an open question still.
Yeah, I get the impression that like how do you call it? Like the mainstream low carb movement is veering towards a PMSF, like, you know, like super low calories, high protein, and yeah, to me it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, I understand why, but I don't think that the metric in which you should qualify a diet should be the like the protein energy ratio. To me, it makes more
energy. You don't even have a distinction in what kind or how it affects fat regulation hormones or anything. It's like no. It's not the same.
And then there's of course the problem of being too reductionist. Like, of course, if you compare a diet in which you have protein powder with oil, which is protein plus fat, you would have a completely different response than if you eat like a steak or eggs, which are also protein plus fat. But so it's not, you know, like I kind of agree with some reductionism in terms of macronutrients, but you also have to consider all the other stuff that is happening with food and not only individual sources. So, I think the best is just to eat protein, fatty protein, and then that should be the best source.
Yeah, no, I agree. And fatty protein just happens to taste awesome. So, sometimes things work out well in life. Yeah. I think I'm about ready to have lunch. I don't know what's been prepared for me, but I think maybe some. Oh no, tonight I'll have a steak on the barbecue. We bought that on purpose. So yeah, so for now it's going to be something else, but we have steak, at least on the fire or barbecue. I don't know. It depends if it's continuing to rain. I have to see.
Yeah.
And what about you? What are you going to have soon?
Well, nothing probably.
You are one meal, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I usually eat around 3 or 4. Well, it depends.
Gotcha.
I probably do go for a walk and then eat, I think, meat. I don't know. Let's see.
Nice. All right, perfect. Okay, I'll stop the recording now.